Hello and welcome to the Unit 7 document-based essay scoring guide, in which we're going to go through each document. I'm going to provide you with a lengthy explanation of each document, and then I'm going to provide you with a reflection of what your shorthand notes should look like under time constraints during the end of year document-based essay. I'm going to show you two different types of groupings and two different types of theses that would get the point on the rubric. Let's start with the prompt. Evaluate to the extent to which unresolved tensions after World War I contributed to the outbreak of World War II. When we analyze the prompt, first we see evaluate to the extent, so to which unresolved tensions contributed to the outbreak of World War II. So to what extent did those unresolved tensions contribute to the start of World War II? Greater extent or lesser extent? And now the historical developments are unresolved tensions that will be identified in the documents. Contribute to the outbreak of World War II. Contribute, contributed, led to. This seems at first glance as a cause and effect essay. So I'm going to look out for causes and I'm going to look out for effects. And then maybe we need to weigh them. To what extent? Maybe some causes are lesser, maybe some effects are greater. We don't know. But that's the clues that we have from analyzing the prompt. Let's take a look at this quick map. Note, the map shows some of the locations mentioned in the documents. It's not one of the 7 documents. Oh, but maybe it's a clue to what's going on. Let's take a look. What do we see? The Axis powers, the Allied powers, neutral powers, Axis advances, cities damaged. Oh man, this is World War II in Europe, 1939 to 1941. I see Germany's aggression and their advances and invasions and bombings of different countries of Western Europe. I'm just going to make a quick note down here, and the only conclusion I drew was unresolved tensions caused Germany's aggression and World War II. That's my note. So we're going to take a look and see. I mean, when I look at this, it kind of looks like to a great extent. Look at this, right? Okay, that's just my inference. Let's take a look at document 1, which is excerpt from the Treaty of Versailles, the Covenant of the League of Nations in 1919. We perform analysis on the document, and here's what we come to realize. The subject of the document, well, this is an excerpt from the Treaty of Versailles, which was the one that ended World War I in 1919. In this excerpt, the Covenant of the League of Nations was formed to prevent further wars. The United States created the League of Nations, yet it did not join the League of Nations. And the refusal of the U.S. to join the League is commonly accepted cause of World War II, since it lacked leadership and enforcement. All right, so we've got to figure out if it's to a great or lesser extent. Well, the intended audience of this document was for the world powers and the aggressors of World War I. The point of view is that of an international organization based on mutual cooperation and collective security, right? This is also from the view of the victors of the war, right? To the victors go the spoils. The purpose was to prevent future wars from forming as a result of secret alliances or isolationism. The authors believed that the only way to have peace in an increasingly interconnected world was to form the League of Nations from countries all over the world. So let's take a look in yellow. This document can be used to show how the unresolved tensions caused by the Treaty of Versailles and or the US's refusal to join the League of Nations led to World War II to a great extent because it increased tensions. Okay? All right, let's take a look at what your notes should look like from this document being timed. So in 3 minutes, it should have taken you around 60 seconds, give or take, to read the document and 2 minutes to make these notes. What's the subject in shorthand? It's American isolationism refuses to join the Treaty of Versailles. Okay? What's the purpose? To prevent future wars. To what extent? We'd say to a great extent, because the U.S. refusal to join makes the League of Nations look weak. And we're going to say this is a cause. Okay? It raised tensions. This is a cause of World War II. Okay, a cause to a great extent. This is what your notes should look like. I gave you the long, detailed explanation, and to cut all that to shorthand in 2 minutes and 120 seconds, you should be able to type that. That's what your notes should look like. Let's take a look at document 2. Okay. Stuart Brown, Japan stuns the world. Okay. United Press. Okay, this is a periodical. Let's take a look. Well, the subject. The document was written by a Western journalist for the United Press in the aftermath of Japan's withdrawal from the League of Nations. The historical context is that Japan had recently invaded Manchuria in Northern California for resources for their imperial expansion. The Japanese established a puppet state in Manchuria called Manchuria. Japanese justified their invasion even though the League of Nations saw it as a clear act of aggression against a member nation. So Japan showed just how weak and ineffective the League of Nations was by simply walking out, saying they don't want to follow the League's rules. And without the US, the League was too weak to enforce Japan to comply with its suggestions of withdrawal. The intended audience was Westerners who lived in democracies and were concerned about international issues. He doesn't say this will lead to World War II because it wasn't known at the time. It is only in hindsight we look back and realize this was one of the main causes of World War II. Well, what's the perspective? It's that of a Western or independent journalist who believed in freedom of the press. His observations seem rather objective or neutral, right? Non-biased, concerning the fact that he's describing one of the causes of World War II. The purpose is to educate Westerners on global affairs. Okay, this document can be used to show how the failure of the League of Nations led to unresolved tensions which contributed to World War II to a great extent. What should your notes look like? Look at the subject. Japan leaves the League of Nations and raises tensions. What's the purpose? To inform the Western world of the weakness of the League of Nations and that it's raising tensions in Europe. To what extent? It's to a great extent because Japan's withdrawal of the League of Nations makes the League look weak. That raises tensions to a great extent. It's another cause to a great extent. Okay, let's look at document 3. The source is the Treaty of Versailles. These are various articles within the Treaty of Versailles, right? Well, the subject, the excerpts are articles from the Treaty of Versailles, all pertaining to the punishment of Germany after World War I. It's widely regarded by historians as the overly harsh treatment of Germany after World War I. The limitations to Germany's military and territorial ambitions in the Rhineland had been crushed by Article 42, and in Article 119, Germany lost control of her overseas possession in Africa, for example. Yet the Allies still maintained their empires. Article 231, known as the War Guilt Clause, is perhaps the most severe of the provisions, as it said Germany accepted blame for the war and agreed to pay reparations to the Allies. This amounted to something like $54 billion Germany did not have. The Allies knew they couldn't pay it back, so this was more of economic humiliation on top of the punishment. Germany's economy after World War I was devastated as a result. Hitler came to power, helping to improve the economy, ultimately led to World War II. The audience was Germany and the other parties involved in the Great War, World War I. The perspective is that of victors of war. This is for the victors, right? It is said to the winners go the spoils, and that was certainly true in this case. Now, all major parties involved helped to cause the roll. They were all militaristic, allied, imperialist, and nationalist. However, only the Germans and her allies were blamed for the causes of the war and forced to pay the consequences. The purpose? To punish Germany, plain and simple. Because countries like France had been destroyed and were vindictive, they wanted political revenge. Okay? This document can be used to show how the Treaty of Versailles furnished unresolved tensions of World War I and led directly to World War II to a great extent. What should your notes look like from all of that? Plain and simple. Subject: the punishment articles of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany. Purpose: to punish Germany, to get revenge. To what extent? It's to a great extent because Germany's punishment raised European tensions. It's another cause of World War II. Wow, we haven't seen any effects yet. This could be all about causes here. Let's see. Let's look at the next one. Document 4, Adolf Hitler, confidential memo. All right, well, what does Adolf Hitler say here? This document is a private letter from Adolf Hitler. the fascist leader of Germany during World War II. Here he argues that militarization must be swift and grand. He is writing in direct response or contrast to the Treaty of Versailles, which tried to limit or halt German militarism. Hitler revamped the German industrial war machine, even though this was in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. He describes how unemployment, as a result of the Great Depression, reparations, and inflation within the German economy, hyperinflation, right, led to impoverishment of Germans. He explains how materials in his expansion of the German Empire. Okay? So his perspective is that of a fascist dictator who's in defiance of international laws, right? The Articles of the Treaty of Versailles. His intended audience can possibly be his interior cabinet, okay? The political advisors, very close, powerful people he needs to support him to make his plan work. His purpose? To lay out his plan for the redevelopment of the German Empire. This document can be used to show how the economic depression and the tensions caused by the Treaty of Versailles motivated Hitler and his ambitions, right, to re-stimulate the German imperial economy, militarize, and ultimately become aggressive and start World War II. What should your notes look like? The subject: Hitler argues for militarization to help German suffering. The purpose: for Hitler to lay out his plan for a new Germany. To what extent? To a great extent, because Germany defied the Treaty of Versailles, and this raised tensions. It's another cause. Look, they all seem to be causes, I'm realizing. So maybe they're different types of causes. I thought this was a causation essay. It may still be. There may be some effects to come, but if there are no effects, this is a similarities and difference essay about causation, because I'm going to group all the causes that are similar. Let's see. Document 5. It's a political cartoon. Lend-Lease aid. I know what this is all about. There's America. They're turning off the hose. Look, droplets of water to Great Britain. British recovery from World War I, and they're fighting during World War II. They need help from America. America's turning isolationist. Let's take a look. The subject. This political cartoon depicts America's hesitation to contribute money, Lend-Lease aid, which would speed up Britain's recovery from World War I and help them in the beginning of World War II. The perspective is that America should just join the war effort. America is becoming more isolationist. The intended audience is for neutral or isolationist Americans, and the purpose is to persuade those isolationist Americans to provide direct aid or even Lend-Lease aid to speed up British recovery to help Great Britain. So this document can be used to show how American neutrality or isolationism, it was hurting its allies in the war effort. It was contributing to the already raised tensions, okay? Eventually the US had to join the war to help the Allies after Pearl Harbor, okay? So this is another one to a great extent, a cause which raised tensions. What should your notes should look like? The subject: American reluctancy to help Britain at the beginning of World War II. The purpose: what's a cartoon? Persuade Americans to help the British. To what extent? To a great extent, because American isolationism raised tensions in Europe. It contributed. It's another cause. These are all causes. I have to group the causes that are similar. Document 6. The Dawes Plan, the distribution of the Dawes annuities, right? To force Germany to pay this money. Let's take a look. The subject. This is a primary source. It's an excerpt from the Dawes Plan after World War I, which was a plan to have Germany pay back reparations for World War I. You can see specifically how much each country was supposed to get and under what currency and exchange rate. The historical context is that after World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, in the Treaty of Versailles, Germany accepted the responsibility for the war and was forced to pay back $33 billion. It's actually more. The Dawes Plan was the law to ensure that the money was paid back. This is one of the reasons Hitler was so angry after World War I, which led him to break from the international order and start a new imperial campaign of aggression and domination. Hitler believed that Germany would never be a great nation as long as it owed all this money to the Allies, who also helped to cause the war. The intended audience was for Germany, but it seems primarily directed towards the Allies who want to get their payments on time. So it was for both. It caused German aggression, and it was more like Ally acceptance, right? The perspective is that of the big four victors of World War I. Where's our money? Give us our money, you're going to pay us for what you did. The purpose was to economically punish Germany. The unintended consequence is that this alienated Hitler from the international community. He began to embark on a conquest of militarist expansion to restore the German economy. Well, this document can be used to show how the Allies, using the Treaty of Versailles and the Dawes Plan, to continue to punish Germany 6 years after the war had ended, leading up to unresolved tensions which caused by the Treaty of Versailles, which led to World War II. Okay, this is another one to a great extent. Angered Hitler, alienated him. Okay, forced him to become aggressive. What should your notes look like? Look, the Dawes Plan punishes Germany's economy. The purpose to economically punish Germany. To what extent? To a great extent, because it raised European tensions. It's a cause. To a great extent, you can argue. Finally, in document 7, the famous Munich conference where Neville Chamberlain and Adolf Hitler shake hands. And what's going on here? Well, this is the notorious image of the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain shaking hands with German dictator Adolf Hitler at the Munich conference. At the Munich Agreement in 1938, in which the Allies attempted to appease Hitler, the Western countries allowed Hitler to annex Czechoslovakia. Hitler promised that he wasn't going to take any more land, and Chamberlain believed him. The policy of appeasement is one of the worst failures in modern diplomatic history because Chamberlain was too weak with Hitler. Hitler beat Chamberlain at the game of international diplomacy. The Allies wanted to avoid war, so they allowed Hitler to annex territory. Nobody wanted a World War II after World War I. All the countries of Western Europe were very uneasy about going head-to-head with Hitler and his new form of militarism, okay? Hitler knew that he had the upper hand, so he took advantage of the Allies by taking Czechoslovakia in 1938 and then Poland the next year. After Hitler invaded Poland, the British fully realized the policy of appeasement had been a huge and costly mistake. As now Hitler was even more powerful and had gained more territory, the war had started largely at the expense of Chamberlain's diplomatic naivety or failure, policy failure, the audience, the political supporters of Great Britain and Germany. And the purpose to inform the audience of a peace agreement reached based on Great Britain's political policy of appeasement. And you can use this document to show how the political tensions between Britain and Germany at the end of World War I led to British policy of appeasement, which increased German military aggression and ultimately led to World War II. Okay, to a great extent. What should your notes look like? Well, here's the policy of the subject. It's a photo of the policy of appeasement. Was the purpose to inform the public of the peace agreement? To what extent? To a great extent, because it promoted German aggression, it raised European tensions. To a great extent, it's another cause. All right, let's take a look at this prompt again. Evaluate the extent to which the unresolved tensions, I've realized all of those are unresolved tensions, causes, after World War I, contributed to what are the effects? The outbreak of war. We don't see any fighting. We don't see any war. These are all causes, different styles, different types of causes. So, style of essay, this is a comparison essay about causation. All different types of causes, we're going to compare them. The unresolved tensions are causes, the outbreak of war, the effects, but there are no effects here. It's a cause. It's a comparison essay that compares different causes. What do you realize about the document analysis? Well, we come to realize every document is a type of cause. Well, what do? Group the documents by similar causes. You can do this in a variety of ways. So you can do this by grouping types of policy-based causes, or you can do this by grouping direct versus indirect causes. Those are two ways that you can do it. Let's look at the first set of groupings. All right, the first I've broken into three groupings. The first is economic depression. The second group is American isolationism. And the third group is European policy failure. So these are all to a great extent in a variety of ways. All right, and we have 3 different ways here. Document 4 reflects economic depression. Document 2 and 5, American isolationism. And documents 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7 represent European policy failures. Okay, that raised tensions to a great extent, which led to World War II. Let's take a look at what a thesis would look like here, would get the point. Unresolved tensions after World War I contributed to the outbreak of World War II to a great extent. The reason for this is because economic depression in document 4, American isolationism in documents 2 and 5, and European policy failure in documents 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 all reflect a variety of historical developments, causes, that raised tensions after World War I and ultimately contributed to the outbreak of World War II. Okay? That's based on this set of groupings from grouping 1. Now let's take a look at a second way of grouping, or grouping 2. We group these with 2 groups. You have the indirect causes, which were to a lesser extent, and you have direct causes for World War II, which were to a greater extent. How would you group those? Well, you would say economic depression in document 4 and American isolationism in document 2 and 5. Those are indirect causes for World War II. And because they're indirect causes, they're causes to a lesser extent. Why are they indirect causes? Because nobody could control, well, Europeans could not control the Great Depression, and Europeans had no control over the Americans. So they're indirect causes. Let's take a look at the direct causes that are to a greater extent. European policy failure. The Europeans had direct control over their political policies between one another. Their agreements, their promises, their handshakes, their denial was all direct control. So they're direct causes to a greater extent. What are those European policy failures? You have the Treaty of Versailles represented in document 1, 3, 4, and 6, and the Dawes Plan as well inside those. The League of Nations in document 2, and the policy of appeasement in document 7 were all under the direct control of Europeans. They created these policies which failed, raised tensions to a great extent, and contributed to the cause of World War II. What would this thesis look like? Although some unresolved tensions after World War I contributed to the outbreak of World War II to a lesser extent, others were more directly tied to the onset of the war. The reason for this is because American isolationism and the Great Depression, reflected in documents 2, 4, and 5, represent indirect causes, while documents 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7 represent European policy failures that more directly raised tensions and led to World War II. Or there's another way to do this. Let's take a look at groupings 3. Okay, so this is also to a greater and lesser extent, but for different reasons. There's a different reasoning process behind this. So on the left-hand side, you have indirect causes to a lesser extent. Why? What's the different reasoning? Because these documents, the League of Nations and appeasement, they were diplomatic policies that attempted to ease unresolved tensions. While on the other side, to a greater extent, you have the League of Nations, the Treaty of Versailles, the Dawes Plan. These are documents that reflect the weakness of European diplomatic policies that actually raised tensions. So to a greater extent on the right-hand side, because these documents raised tensions, on the left-hand side, they were diplomatic policies that attempted to ease unresolved tensions. Now, we know the League of Nations and the policy of appeasement ultimately failed and over time did raise tensions. But the way the documents appear inside of this document-based essay, you can use them to show that the point and purpose was to ease unresolved tensions as long as you show the limits of the document. Okay, so you can say that the point and purpose
of the League of Nations was to ease unresolved tensions after World War I, and appeasement was to ease the unresolved tensions that were leading up to a Second World War and German aggression. But you'd say, though the purpose was to ease, now you show the limits, the historical context shows us that they actually did lead to World War II. All right? So let's take a look at the thesis that you can construct from this reasoning. Although some unresolved tensions after World War I contributed to the outbreak of World War II to a lesser extent, others were more directly tied to the onset of war. The reason for this is because the League of Nations and the policy of appeasement reflected in Documents 1 and 7 represent attempts at diplomacy to ease tensions and serve as causes to a lesser extent, while Documents 2 through 6 represent specific European policy failures that more directly raised tensions and led to World War II. Compare the SOAPs, groups, and thesis for Thesis 1 and Thesis 2 to what you have, and make the necessary adjustments to construct the rest of your document-based essay. I hope this helps.